Let me show you something almost everyone overlooked in the new season 6 scene. It's a tiny detail, easy to ignore, but once you notice it, the whole conversation makes sense. Look closely at the chains on Jesus' wrists. They weren't placed there only to show that he had been arrested. They revealed a deeper meaning behind every question the high priest asks him. And once you understand why those chains are there, the entire scene changes. What seems like a simple interrogation suddenly becomes a window into the fears, politics, and beliefs of that time. One of the very first questions the high priest asks Jesus is whether he has shown contempt for the Sabbath or broken it. Most viewers immediately remember moments when Jesus healed on the Sabbath or when his disciples picked grain. These scenes are so familiar that we assume the leaders are angry for those reasons alone. But focusing only on those moments misses the real issue. Many Christians today assume Jesus rejected the strict Jewish laws or ignored traditions that he thought were unnecessary. But that isn't the full story. To really understand what's happening, we need to know how Jewish people viewed the law long before Jesus' ministry began. For centuries, they recognized two kinds of Torah, two forms of God's instruction. The first was the written Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. The second was the oral Torah, teachings that explained how to apply the written commands in everyday life. These oral teachings couldn't be written down, but they were widely accepted and passed from generation to generation. Many people misunderstand this and think Jesus rejected these oral teachings. But when you look carefully at what he didn't break them. Instead, he interpreted them differently than the religious leaders. He challenged their understanding, but he didn't disrespect God's law. So if breaking the Sabbath wasn't the real issue, then why is he chained? That question becomes clearer when the high priest asks something else, whether Jesus' teachings could be viewed as promoting violence. And there are 2 major reasons this was such an important question at the time. First, Jesus had done things that sounded threatening to Rome's authority. One example is the moment when he cast demons into a herd of pigs, causing them to run into the sea. This happened in a region where the symbol of the Roman soldiers was a pig. That detail would have meant something powerful. It sent a message Rome couldn't ignore. Your power can be overturned. Then Jesus began referring to himself as the Son of Man and even allowed people to call him the Messiah. Back then, many believed the Messiah would be a warrior king who would rise up against Rome. So even the titles he used created tension, and if that wasn't enough, Jesus also allowed people to call him Lord, a title the Roman emperor claimed for himself. Rome did not play games about words like that. Anyone who accepted the titles Lord, Son of Man, or Messiah could be seen as challenging Caesar's authority individually. Any one of these things would have alarmed both Rome and the Jewish leaders. But when you combine all of them, the situation becomes explosive. And then there's the final piece. Jesus is from Galilee. To many people at that time, Galilee was almost a warning label. It was known for revolts, riots, and uprisings. Groups in that region constantly rebelled against Rome. The whole area was filled with tension, rebellion, and revolution. This explains why the high priest also asks Jesus whether one of his followers is a zealot. That question isn't random. The zealots were active in Galilee. Their strongholds were scattered throughout the region. They were passionate about removing Roman rule even through violence. But Jesus' answer shows something deeper is going on. In some Gospels, the word translated zealot comes from the Greek word kanios, which seems connected to a Hebrew word describing someone who is zealous or full of passion. Jesus wasn't gathering warriors. He was gathering people who were passionate about God's mission. And this brings us closer to the deeper meaning of those chains. Before we get there, notice how all this background helps make sense of the questions Jesus faces. When you understand the world he lived in, the whole scene becomes clearer. There is so much happening behind these questions. They aren't random. They reveal fear of rebellion, fear of loss of power, fear of impurity, and fear of Rome. And this exact idea, the importance of context, is just as true for Scripture. Many times we read a verse and feel like we understand it. But when we look at the cultural, political, or religious context, that same verse suddenly becomes richer. Details we ignored start to shine. Lessons we missed suddenly make sense. Scripture begins to feel alive in a new way. Instead of reading words on a page, we see a story unfolding. And when we do that, the Bible starts to speak directly into our lives. It becomes clearer, stronger, and more personal. If you've ever wished to understand the Bible this way, to read it and feel as though the pieces are finally coming together, then learning this kind of context is essential. And this is exactly what happens when we go back to Jesus' chains, because up to this point, we've only seen the public reasons the leaders think he should be bound. But the final question the high priest asks reveals a deeper issue. He asks whether Jesus has been seen eating with tax collectors, sharing meals with impure women, and allowing a Gentile woman to travel with him. These questions point directly to the heart of the religious world at the time. Back then, the Jewish world was divided into two groups, Jews and Gentiles. Jews followed the Torah, Gentiles didn't. This difference shaped everything. It affected daily life, relationships, meals, worship, and identity. Because Gentiles didn't follow the Torah, many Jews referred to them as sinners. This wasn't just a moral label. It meant those who do not live by God's commands. Sinners were considered ritually unclean. People believed impurity could spread through touch, through objects, even through shared spaces. So when Jesus not only ate with these people but welcomed them into his life, the religious leaders saw that as a direct threat. In their minds, he made himself unclean. To them, he was violating everything that set Israel apart. But Jesus saw things differently. According to him, the true chains weren't around his wrists, they were around the minds of the religious leaders. They were trapped in a narrow understanding of the Torah. They were so focused on protecting the law that they forgot to live out its purpose. From the beginning, God gave Israel the law so they could be a light to the nations, so they could bring the Gentiles into relationship with God. That was the mission. That was the calling. But somewhere along the way, fear replaced purpose. The leaders believed the law was meant to keep people out when, in reality, the law was meant to bring people in. So when they accused Jesus of impurity for spending time with Gentiles, Jesus challenges their thinking. They are missing the very heart of God's plan. The law was never meant to isolate Israel. It was meant to prepare them to welcome the world. And here is where the scene reaches into our own lives. We need to ask ourselves whether we've fallen into the same pattern. Have we stayed away from people we think are too sinful because we want to protect ourselves? Have we believed the message of Jesus but avoided sharing it where it's needed most? Have we ever let fear keep us from bringing light to places that feel dark? Understanding this scene through its deeper layers changes everything. The chains take on new meaning. The questions become heavier, and Jesus' responses become clearer. But it doesn't just change how we watch the scene. It changes how we read the whole Bible. It changes how we understand our faith. It changes how we live. If you want to learn how to unlock the Bible in this way, how to see the layers that make everything come alive, you can join the next Unlock the Bible challenge. It's a simple 5-day experience that will help you understand Scripture with clarity you've never had before. And if you want another video that will open your eyes to the deeper meaning behind scenes from the show and stories from Scripture, you can explore the next one as well.